January 15, 2024 marks the federal holiday known as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, honoring the birthday of one of the most seminal figures in American history. Dr. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, the second child of Pastor Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King, a former school teacher. His father influenced him heavily in his early years in their daily confrontations with the horrors of segregation. He attended segregated public schools throughout his childhood and then went to Morehouse College, an HBCU in Atlanta, where he studied medicine and law. Afterwards, King followed his desire to become a Baptist minister and later earned a doctorate in systematic theology from Boston University. It was there that he met Coretta Scott, whom he wed in 1953. While his father had modeled his fight against segregation basically since he was born, it wasn't until 1955 that this fight reached a national audience.
We will continue to protest in the same spirit of love and nonviolence and passive resistance. Now, I might say that that is no bitterness on my part, and certainly no bitterness on the part of the more than 40,000 citizens of Montgomery.
Soon thereafter, Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat for a white passenger on a bus and was arrested.
Well, we hope to achieve equal rights as any human being deserves. That's what we are working for.
What do you think the prospects are for achieving that goal?
I think we'll be successful if we continue.
How long do you think it would take?
I have no idea how long.
Montgomery's black community, led in large part by Dr. King, staged a hugely successful bus boycott that lasted for over a year.
For 381 days, the Montgomery walked or rode in special carpools. The half-filled and sometimes empty buses made the effect of the boycott felt.
For several weeks now, we, the citizens of Montgomery, have been involved in a nonviolent protest against the injustices which we have experienced on the buses for a number of years. This is a nonviolent protest. We are depending on moral and spiritual forces, using the method of passive resistance.
Taxi cabs and carpools are pressed into service as blacks in Montgomery continue to boycott the buses week after week, month after month.
But Dr. King, himself a victim of these same animosities, continued to inspire his people with his own philosophy of nonviolence. Using peaceful methods, Montgomery won their battle. And with it, they won the admiration and support of millions of their countrymen, black and white alike.
As his frustrations with the apathy of the white moderate grew, his popularity and stature among black Americans continued to climb. In 1963, King delivered his I Have a Dream speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in D.C. to a crowd of nearly 250,000 in the March on Washington. It was here that the political establishment really began to understand just how powerful a figure Dr. King could be.
Washington, D.C., 1963. Democracy speaks in a mighty voice.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
From here, Dr. King and other black church leaders founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to organize nonviolent protests, and the organization was seminal in the passage of both the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
This is a demonstration in Montgomery, Alabama, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. In contrast to the violence of many marches, this one is held peacefully with police blessing and under permit. The day before, the marchers had been dispersed by state troopers and sheriff's deputies when they marched without a permit. Today, troopers and deputies are absent. Only city police line the route of march.
This bill will establish a simple, uniform standard which cannot be used, however ingenious the effort to flout our Constitution. It will provide for citizens to be registered by officials of the United States government.
Polling places were swamped by both white voters, some of whom stood in line for up to 4 hours before casting their ballots. Many lines stretched for over 3 blocks. Thousands of voters were voting for the first time in their lives.
Radicalized by the Vietnam War and a series of riots throughout America in the late 1960s, King's patience for incrementalism wore thin. In late 1967, Dr. King began organizing a multiracial occupation of Washington, D.C. in the form of the Poor People's Campaign. When Dr. King was visiting Memphis in support of black sanitation workers on strike, he was assassinated in his hotel room on April 4, 1968.
I was deeply saddened last evening, as all men of goodwill must have been, by the senseless slaying of Dr. Martin Luther King.
My husband faced the possibility of death without bitterness or hatred. He knew that this was a sick society, totally infested with racism and violence, that questioned his integrity, maligned his motives, and distorted his views, which would ultimately lead to his death.
The life and legacy of Martin Luther King, Jr. find meaning in the words of a black slave preacher that he quoted many times. We ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we want to be. We ain't what we're going to be. But thank God we ain't what we was.
In the decades since his death, history has proven what reality in Black America always knew: that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a good person deserving of veneration. His popularity has slowly risen throughout the years to his status now as a near mythical embodiment of the civil rights movement and nonviolent protest. However, much of what Dr. King fought for remains to be realized. So as the country celebrates Dr. King this year, let's celebrate the very tangible gains that America has made, of course, but let's also remember all the work he still thought had to be done before he and his movement were prematurely and viciously cut down.